Hey, welcome to a little bit of travel talk. And I was just thinking, I'm travel journalist and broadcaster Rudy Maxa. I'm here at my enormous estate in Palm Beach, Florida. Actually, that's not true. I'm staying as a guest at a friend's condo in Naples, Florida. And we're on the third floor here. And behind me, you can see pool and palm trees, all of which I'll be saying goodbye to tomorrow because I'm returning to my home in St. Paul, Minnesota, where right now it's -8 degrees, I believe. We are talking today on live on the 20th of January, Thursday, 20th of January, 2022. I tell you that because when we talk travel, you should know that this conversation is taking place during still the era of COVID. So if you're watching this a year or two later, I hope you're looking back in the rearview mirror and saying, COVID, oh yeah, I remember that. That was a while back. I hope you're saying that. At any rate, my guest today is a guy who knows a whole lot about travel. And in fact, he's been brought into the Transportation Security Agency, Administration, the TSA, as the Chief Innovation Officer. And I'm going to ask him what that means in terms of TSA. So we're going to talk a little about how to get you through the airport faster, problems that are encountered in the airports, things that can be made easier. Many of those things through technology. We're going to talk to Dan McCoy about that. So nice to have you here, Dan. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Rudy, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. You have a much better backdrop than I do.
I know.
I am quite envious.
It disappears into a blanket of white snow for the next one. This is the end of my 10 days here. Let's start with your title, Chief Innovation Officer. What is your mandate? What did you think it was when you got there? I know you've been there, about a year?
A little over a year. Yep.
Okay. What did you think it was going to be? Is it what you thought it was going to be? What is it?
So I appreciate you having me. Genuinely, I love talking to a variety of audiences.
We appreciate
that go through the TSA every time they travel and jump on a flight. So I genuinely appreciate the opportunity to reach out to them. So Chief Innovation Officer at TSA, I think, looks a lot like a Chief Innovation Officer everywhere else, but it is a relatively new position for a lot of folks to hear, seeing innovation kind of elevated up to the C-suite. So little background on me, right? I came out of management consulting where I was focused on innovation for the last 5 or 6 years, thinking of new business models in the way that you can bring them into different organizations and help stay ahead of the curve of disruption. So coming into TSA, right, I knew the job was going to be multifaceted. I had a good understanding of the aviation checkpoint, the aviation ecosystem, the airport ecosystem. But what we knew coming into it is that innovation means so many different things to so many different people. When I was at my prior role at Deloitte, innovation, even within our own walls, meant 5 or 6 different things at any given time. It was new technology, it was new business lines, it was training opportunities and things like agile design and human-centered design. So joining TSA, we knew we had to figure out what TSA meant by innovation, and we had to figure out if we needed to reshape that or if we needed to lean into it a little bit harder. So I always joke, we played this game with the leadership team when I first joined, and I said, when I say innovation, you say blank. And we went around the room, and one by one, we got 18 different answers from 18 different people, and we realized pretty quickly, okay, we need to do some level setting. We need to get everybody working on the same sheet of music. We need a doctrine in how we lead innovation as an agency so that when you give an employee the go-ahead to, thou shall innovate, you're not setting them up for failure. You're giving them a mandate that they know what it means. So more or less, our role in the innovation office at TSA is to be creative and be agile. Look at different business opportunities in different places and see if they have market fit within TSA.
All right, so I just want to be clear. So you weren't brought in to innovate how TSA is run as an organization or any of that stuff. You're looking at what we, the public, see of TSA when it comes in terms of innovation, right?
It's a mix. So the vast majority of my role is, I would say, internally focused. We use the allegory sometimes, fertile, ripe seeds falling on fertile soil, right? Our job is to make sure that TSA culturally and organizationally as an enterprise is ready to take new opportunities, be agile and move quickly when either an opportunity presents itself or unfortunately, given how TSA was formed and where we came from, if a new threat vector is identified, how do we establish an organization with toolkits and training and expectations so that when we need to move quickly or when we want to keep up with the commercial market for either new technology or new processes, the organization is ready to do that. So my team focuses kind of on how we set the culture of innovation, how we talk about it, how we execute internally, and make sure that it's repeatable and scalable so we don't just have, single hero innovators fighting against all odds to get something done.
All right. Well, let's start with what most people think of when they think of the TSA, which is the very first thing they encounter after they've left the check-in counter of an airport and they're going through security. That system has changed so many times since it was inaugurated. Scanning machines have gotten more sophisticated, very global entry, TSA Pre, all these new things have come up.
Yep.
How much of your focus and your team's focus is on that part of that very, very public-facing part of TSA?
Just a great question.
Put that on the full screen if you want there, Tommy, just for... Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
Big in a second. No, you're good. We would be remiss to say that we don't focus a lot on the checkpoint. To your point, it is where most of the public interacts with us. I'm going to butcher the exact terminology, but TSA recently, from an OMB, an Office of Management and Budget proclamation, we are a high impact service provider in the federal government. So not only are we a security agency, but just by way of how many constituents and how many citizens we interact with on a day-to-day basis, we are a high impact service provider. So we always are looking and assessing what can be done better at the checkpoint. How can we continue to maintain pace with commercial enterprise and commercial technology when it comes to new checkpoint capabilities? I had a call earlier today. We have some really nuanced next steps and next generation ideas that involve open architecture. How can you have a more modular, more interoperable checkpoint so that instead of replacing these big machines, but for every 10 years, you're swapping out components so that it's always cutting edge as they become available, and you're weaving in new technologies as they exist. So we focus a lot on the checkpoint, but the benefit of my team as we try to tackle the culture and the way that we innovate is that we have an entire organization that's really focused on driving new standards and new requirements for the checkpoint. Some of our colleagues at TSA run a group called the Innovation Task Force, and their role is predominantly to take commercial technology, some really promising new capabilities, and test and demonstrate their viability in our checkpoint. So those are things that we would normally see as pretty nascent, far out, and they're helping us rapidly expedite the process of getting them into the checkpoint, and therefore adding benefit to our officers and bringing benefit to our passengers.
Well, I know there's some new techniques being tried out in various airports around the country. Can you describe some of those new things, or even give us a glimpse of what the future might be in a few years for the average passenger?
Yep. Yeah, so the big split, right? Average passenger, we have TSA Pre-Check, and then we obviously have our standard lane. So I'll try to do an all-encompassing, but a few really good new pieces of technology and new processes that are supporting us in the way that we do security screening. So number one, as you enter into TSA, right, as you're walking in, is something called Credential Authentication technology. So everybody's used to the process today of you brandish your ID, you brandish your boarding pass to an officer, and he or she does the check, they scan them, they match you with our systems to say, okay, Rudy is valid, he's flying, this is a valid ID. You do the little match, and I can say, yep, that's him. Credential Authentication technology, or CAT, is our next generation capability in that realm. So what we have today, CAT 1, passengers during COVID have had the opportunity to self-direct where their identification goes or where their credential goes. So you put it in the machine yourself, you no longer are exchanging documents with the officer, and you no longer need a boarding pass, right? The benefit of the technology is that you can just present your identification and it matches against our systems so that we know, okay, Rudy is traveling today. We don't need his boarding pass like we did in the past. I think
Is that up and running somewhere now?
that is. So CAT is being deployed throughout the country as our first stage, CAT, what we're calling CAT 1, because the amazing thing about this technology, and I think a really good example of TSA innovation, right, is we had this new piece of technology, and then during the pandemic, we understood how big of an impact it not only had on security, but safety as well, and safety for officers and safety for passengers. So we pulled everything back to the left and we said, okay, let's expedite how quickly we can make improvements on this. So we've moved into CAT 2, which is CAT with camera. So this is where we start to move into that biometric match, that identity match, where it's not just Rudy presenting his ID and then an officer validating on screen that that's a valid ID and you're flying. We're now introducing a facial match, a one-to-one facial recognition match or credential match, where we're taking the picture on your ID and we're matching it to your face in real time. And that way we're now binding that credential to you and adding an extra level of fidelity to that process. That has rapidly grown from kind of this conceptual idea to something that we're piloting in the field already at several different airports.
Do you know where some of those airports are, Dan?
I'm going to probably get in trouble because I think I know where they are, but I want to say that at Atlanta and Detroit, we are running pilots right now.
Okay.
We have some press on it. I could direct your audience to tsa.gov. We have some examples of how it's operating right now. We're rolling that pilot project out because along with our camera credentialing, we're also starting to include things like mobile driver's license technology that people may have seen. We have a partnership with Apple, a cooperative agreement with Apple to bring mobile driver's licenses to the iPhone so that now passengers are not just brandishing their ID, but potentially using their iPhone and Apple Wallet as their mobile driver's license, using the facial recognition match, and then using that as their proof of identity. So that's one of the new techniques that's driving some efficiency and taking some of that percentage time off of your wait time. Mm-hmm. It's really over the span of an entire day adds up to a significant improvement in throughput.
And is it going to take years for this to roll out, or if it's working well, can it be deployed more rapidly?
That's always a tough question to answer from my position, right? So the
technology
is there.
5 years from now.
Right. No, not 5 years from now. No, I hope it's not 5 years from now. And I can say, if it is, you guys can all call me back and, yell at me live on air. But no, it's not 5 years from now. The technology's here, right? We are validating some of the components now, but for the most part, we're really seeing great traction. We're seeing great viability scores. We're seeing great feasibility in rolling it out. But first and foremost, I work for the government, right? So we have this amazing capability, but there's a stage gate and there's a timing that we still have to go through of when is funding available, how quickly can we deploy it, can you get the training implementation up and running quickly, can you network it in your system architecture, are all of your partners and your ecosystem partners online? So the tech is there. We've been amazingly quick at getting it to where we are right now, but we're hitting that process again of we have 440 federalized airports in the United States. So to change over operational technology that quickly is difficult sometimes.
Well, fortunately, Dan, you're from Washington, so you're here to help us, as we used to say in DC. I guess one thing, the machines that are doing this, that are matching perhaps driver's license faces to the person standing there in the airport about to go through security, is there a factory somewhere making more of them now? I guess maybe that's a way to put it. This is not an experiment box that somebody's developed, and who knows whether they can make enough of them fast enough.
We talk about this is like such a government term that we've been trying to bring in more to our conversation, but commercializable events, right? How do you indicate to the market, I'm ready to buy this? They are being manufactured. We, like everybody else, our downstream vendors that we love have been hit with the chip shortage that everybody else has experienced with COVID. So not only are we fighting a battle right now of where do you deploy them so that it's adding the most benefit. How do we eventually get to the saturation point so it is deployed everywhere? How do we do that quickly with agility? How are we always being creative in how we're procuring these? But then simultaneously, we recognize that our vendors are struggling to kind of get in the capabilities and the requirements that we need to actually get these machines built.
Is there a new generation of equipment that will speed bags through security faster? I know, if you're I can never, it's a TSA pre-TSA. I can never remember.
Pre-check, yeah.
You don't have to take your computer out
Right.
or your iPad out. Yet if you have to take your shoes off if you don't have the pre-TSA thing. Is there a day when everybody will be able to go through with their shoes on, leaving their computers in a bag and so on?
Yes and no, right? So we're always, it's multi-leveled, and this is the tricky part of TSA, right? We are kind of a forward-leaning organization. We're always customer-focused. We're always at the center of the passenger experience, but we're responsive to threats, and we're responsive to intelligence that we gather from our friends in the intelligence community, the IC, or our internal INA folks. So, breaking that down, right, as you said, pre-check today gives passengers the opportunity to leave certain items in their carry-on baggage, so they don't have to divest some property. That's based on a really serious risk model that we put people through with some vetting, but the standard lane isn't necessarily at that point yet because, again, the risk structure that we've calculated means that we have to ask people to divest some stuff. So CT, computed tomography, is a leap forward in how we're doing baggage screening. So there is an assessment always being done. We're always looking at, how do we look for prohibited items? How do we look for blunts and sharps and weaponry and things like that? And at the same time, right, we're always assessing that list of, do we need to have passengers divest some of this property away? I can say for the shoe scanning specifically, right, I took a trip out to one of our national labs probably 3 or 4 months ago, and this is where they're focused right now, which is how do you bring in a new piece of operational technology so that you can have passengers leave their shoes on and then still get the security benefit of scanning what could potentially be concealed in a shoe. Back to the point of commercializable events, we want to see that enter the market faster. So that is being, I think the intellectual property for that is being licensed out right now so that we are going to start procuring that soon and then testing it in live environments. And again, to your point, that speeds up the process, as now passengers aren't taking their shoes off, kind of delaying that standard line. You're already walking into an AIT machine, the hands up kind of X-ray machine. Now that technology is embedded in the floor of that device, we are speeding up the process of getting people through the checkpoint because it's all really in one.
Yeah, because the taking off your shoes obviously adds a lot of time. And as you see, if you add up all the passengers in one day who are untying their shoes and fishing them out of the bin and putting them back on, that's a lot of time in one day. That is great to hear. So the technology is sort of reading your shoe from the bottom up as you're doing your other scan.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything else regarding the checkpoint besides more rapid and secure identification? And then, as we just mentioned, the shoe thing. Let me reintroduce you. If somebody's just tuned into this on YouTube or Facebook, my guest is I'm Rudy Maxa. My guest is Dan McCoy. He is the Chief Innovation Officer at the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA. You know the guys at the airport who look at your IDs and send you through the security checkpoints. He's been discussing the first 20 minutes that we've been talking. One of the goals of he and his staff, or TSA overall, is to speed up, make going through those lines easier for you, faster for you, because it'll save everybody, including the TSA employees, time, aggravation, and just basic problems. I find that fascinating. Is there anything else at the check-in point besides faster facial recognition that gets people to do faster, and then the shoe thing that I should be asking you about?
So this is the fun part of my job, right? I always joke that I have a tough job at TSA and my team has the best jobs at TSA, right? Because what we're focused on, we have these specific components that we're always thinking about, but the innovation team, first and foremost, we're looking at how do you bring in creative new inventions and creative new technology and business models into TSA, right? So what can we lift and shift from the pharmaceutical industry, from Industry 4.0, from finance, from all different markets about how they're using either emerging technologies or emerging business types, and then deploying them across their enterprise. How can we benefit from the same thing? So artificial intelligence and machine learning is something we are highly focused on, of how can we use it in the same way that other industries have to expedite screening for passengers? How can we reduce the burden on our officers to screen every bag and make really high impact judgment calls? How can we start using technology and emerging tech to assist in that process? Whether it's screening bags with machine learning to identify, identify different pieces of prohibited items, whether it's to identify blunts and sharps. We're really looking at a lot of different hypotheses to make screening, more safe and more effective.
That is great. By the way, I should say, I don't know if you can hear the screams of little children behind me. They're not being tortured.
There's a pool behind you, I assume.
There's a pool. You can feel my shoulder, and the kids are having a ball back there. And if you just tuned in, we're talking to Dan McCoy right now on Thursday, January 20th, 2022. And if you're a regular viewer of I Was Just Thinking here with me, normally I'm not in front of a pool in January. I'm freezing my keister off in St. Paul, Minnesota. But I am today in Naples, Florida. So if you hear the children, I can hear them. I don't know how much they're carried onto the computer for you guys to hear, but they are a lot of kids having fun in the background. Okay, Dan. You touched on one thing. You talked about having to incorporate intelligence. And I'm not talking about artificial intelligence. I'm speaking of intelligence about bad guys. And I think you and I talked before the show, and I have not read the book yet. I don't think you have yet, but it's called Disruption. This new book that came out and went into great detail about a plot that was foiled by British intelligence and American. The Brits got onto it first, of a bunch of folks, and I think about 7 of them in London, who were plotting to, I don't know how many perpetrators there were. They're planning to blow up 7 airliners flying from London to the United States, I guess on the same day or pretty much, simultaneously. And I don't know how they were planning to do it, what they found that they thought they could sneak by security. But I presume that is something that you all are always thinking. You must have people who do that 24/7, right? Who are saying, okay, what, can you hide it in a hidden tape recorder? That was some plan back in the Osama bin Laden days or something.
Yeah, we do, right? And that's, again, the benefit of my role, right? So predominantly within innovation, the way that we kind of articulate our message to the workforce and to our partners is we drive the ambidexterity of TSA, right? So we are always focused on how innovation enables TSA to act on intelligence, right? How do we always be quick and agile in intercepting what we know and then making a definitive effort to go address that incoming challenge? And that's really what we saw here, right? Is that this was an opportunity for the UK government and the US government to say, we have a credible threat, right? We know that there is an enemy at the door, and they have found a vulnerability that they're looking to exploit, right? You only close that gap in time with agility. And we kind of tie that one-to-one with innovation. You only close that gap when you say, I have the capacity, I have the capability, I have the permission structure in my agency to act with haste, to act quickly, to go address this threat. And we look at that with our intelligence and analysis group to say, okay, where are these threat vectors coming from that we need to be on the ball to solve? And then what we're doing in the innovation shop, right, is we're carrying that capability, that demand structure, and saying, where are we kind of looking at any opportunity, whether it's to increase efficiency, whether it's to increase passenger experience, whether it's to increase security outcomes, and how can we bring that same level of agility, that same level of requirement to addressing those problems as well.
What about global cooperation on things like bag matching and maybe a universal ID? I know that scares people who think, we'll all one day just be one number worldwide. But is there a trend toward? I know there are people in government, and not necessarily you all, but talking about having a national COVID thing that'll be accepted by other countries and so on. And there's people who fear again that this is a violation of privacy.
Right.
We'll have some big computer somewhere in Washington that has all the details about their medical history and their life and their family and their social media all in one place. Is there a chance for more global cooperation that doesn't threaten civil liberties?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And that's right. That kind of dystopian state, right? This is my team and I were talking earlier today. I take this question. I love this question because I have my own opinions on it. But, from a perspective of this conversation, right, there's not a trend to have a global standardized identification system. I don't think anybody kind of wants that nor sees that, but there's so much international cooperation getting done day to day with TSA, our friends at some of our
Whoop. I always hate it when a guest drops out when he's talking about cooperating with people overseas. Are you back?
All right, I've made it back somehow. I apologize. I don't know what just happened there. But cooperating with our international groups, CATSA in Canada, the UK, it's always a little bit different. TSA is the regulator operator, whereas other countries, there's the regulator, Department or Ministry of Transportation, and then there's the operator, which will be Heathrow Airport or Avinor within some of the Scandinavian countries. So a few examples, right? We drive an incredible amount of international cooperation. So one pilot that we are authorized to run right now through Congress is something called one-stop security. So if you're a passenger inbound to the United States from Heathrow, Rudy, you're probably a great example, right? You're coming in on a 777 and you're landing at JFK before either carrying on to Naples or carrying on to the freezing cold tundra of the Midwest. You go through TSA screening. You divest from your British Airways flight, your Virgin Atlantic, and then you go through TSA screening to get back on your domestic flight. One-stop security looks to kind of put an end to that, right? So certain populations on certain flights will have the opportunity to get a level of reciprocity for their screening so that when you go through screening at Heathrow, we take that as the same level, or we consider reciprocity with that screening so that you can carry on and go directly to your next destination without going through TSA. I'd be remiss not to note, I was on a call earlier this morning, another panel with ACI, which is one of our trade groups, and I was the only American on the panel. There was a Canadian, 2 Brits, and then an Australian, all on the panel talking about how we can cooperate internationally when it comes to data sharing, when it comes to technology sharing, and really, better buying patterns and better buying habits for all of us, because we all buy the same equipment.
Well, let me just go back to your example of flying in from Heathrow. If I fly in from Heathrow on British Airways or Virgin Atlantic, the odds are pretty good that I'll be flying Delta back into the Twin Cities where I live. And that means
Sure.
I've got to go outside the building to go to another terminal. I presume whatever you're working on would not save me from having to go through another security check in the next terminal.
We're working on it. This is where it gets to that tricky. There's an old trope, right? If you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport.
Obviously, when somebody
right.
can hand me a weapon in between the 2 terminals and say, "Go to it, bad boy,"
Right, and that's what we're working on now, right? Is that concept, right? The con ops that we're trying to put together. That's going to be dependent on the partners that we have, either at the airport, local law enforcement, where you're diverting or where you're returning from. So we're also looking at this partnership with South Korea. We're obviously looking at it with the UK and always open to chatting with others. But it's really about the need for rescreening and trying to move away from that requirement and setting up and saying, our international partners have agreed to hit a certain standard of screening that we're also hitting. So we can have that reciprocity to know Rudy was scanned to a level that we find adequate, and we can, if safely controlled in the sterile environment, we can let you go to your next flight without having to be rescreened.
In a sterile environment.
In the sterile environment, yes.
But if I leave that terminal and go outside and walk over to another terminal, I'm not in a sterile environment anymore, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So we would have to figure out and this is where it gets, we've kind of talked about this before with my team, right? There's a program that we've been thinking about called RSSP, or reimbursable security screening partnerships, where the sterile area could be a bus, right? If you can develop some type of concept of operations where that vehicle is getting certified by our inspectors, you could go from a sterile zone, and then I don't know if you've ever flown into IAD over in DC, right? But we have buses. You could be driven from sterile side to sterile side if there isn't a secure walkway across. But this is the fun part about my job, right? Is never let perfect be the enemy of the good. We want to try this anywhere we can try it, right? Anywhere we can go take this hypothesis and see if there's value. Let's go try it. These are reversible decisions. So let's give it a look and then see if there's value.
Right. Are you a frequent flyer guy who collects points and stuff?
I am. I can't talk about my allegiances, but I can say that I am.
I'm not asking your allegiance. I just wondered if you were an aviation geek as well as a guy who knows a lot about technology and so on. So it seems to me you've got several legs to your table there, which is technology, a big one.
Yep.
Security. I mean, global cooperation and knowing who the bad guys are and what they want to do. And then your public-facing part. So do you really think there'll be a time in the next couple of years where we may not use other services or may not need to get T3SC, where all pigs will be equal and going through security? It's like it's a goal.
We kind of talk about this internally, right? There's only one real competitor to TSA Pre-Check, and that's our standard lane, right?
That what lane?
Our standard lane, right?
Oh,
so TSA Pre-Check is a beneficial program, and again, you give up some background information, you go through your interview process, we do some background vetting.
Yeah.
You pay a small fee. I forget what it is. It's less than $100 for 5 years. I do forget what it is right now. I'm sure somebody will correct me in the edits here in my post meeting.
Less than
$100. One thing that we're always focused on, right, is the benefit of pre-check, our new emerging technologies that we're going to ask the public to kind of work with us as we figure out best how to implement it. That's going to start in TSA Pre-Check. So shoe scanner, TSA Pre-Check customers today can leave their shoes on, but more likely than not, we'll roll pilots out in that sector to make sure that the system is working as we assume, because we have the redundancy of those background checks. Over time, I think we're going to always be looking at not only ways to improve the standard lane experience, but like in that business mindset, right? One of the TSA's rare opportunities is that we can use TSA Pre-Check as a kind of pseudo business structure. Is how do you drive more value to Pre-Check so that it is always bringing you benefit to be an enrollee in Pre-Check, whether it's divesting less property. People always ask me the total recall, when are you going to be able to walk straight through and never stop, an unbroken stride to get to your gate? That will first be seen in TSA Pre-Check, if that's ever the future, because that's where we'll end up piloting that technology, and we'll continue to improve the value proposition of passengers enrolling in Pre-Check. Because for us, right, the benefit is immense. Having that information and being able to do that pre-risk on passengers is tremendously helpful for how we maintain solid throughput throughout the checkpoints.
Well, Dan, I'm glad TSA thought to hire a chief innovation officer. I'm glad he's you, and I'm glad you took time out of, I know, a very busy schedule to talk to us today. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Rudy.
All right, take care, Dan. Dan McCoy is the Chief Innovation Officer at TSA. He is charged with, making security not just more secure, but more easy and more efficient for those of us who are passengers to pass through. Hey, thanks for joining me today. I always give you a pitch. If you would like to receive my newsletter, I write it every 2 weeks, send it out by email. I don't advertise anything in it. I don't give your name to anybody else. It's just sort of gossipy. It's sort of little factoids you probably, unless you pay as close attention as I do to travel, you probably don't. It doesn't come across your desk so often. But my newsletter will fill you in on some of those. A lot of very short items. If you'd like to receive that newsletter, just go to maxatours.com/newsletter. That's Maxatours, all one word, maxatours.com/newsletter. And all you have to do is put in your full name and your email, and we'll put you on the list. And if you're thinking of going to Europe in 2022, you can check out a couple of the tours there as well. All right, that's it. I got nothing else to pitch. I remind you again, we recorded this, this conversation took place on January 20th, 2022 in the COVID era. But it'll stay up there on YouTube and Facebook, I guess, long beyond our lifetimes. I don't know how long those things stay up there. Anyway, thanks for joining me for this episode. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another one. Take care and travel safely.